So, in 1256, the Persian scholar Ibn Khaldun recorded what was undoubtedly an old story at that time. And it's a story that you may have heard about the invention of the game of chess. So the story goes that the inventor of chess presented this as a gift to the king. And the king was so delighted with this gift that he said to the inventor, choose any gift of your choosing as a reward. This game's so amazing. And so the inventor kind of made a strange request, and he said, oh, I'm just a humble man. Please just give me 1 grain of wheat on the first square of the chessboard. And then on the second, double that to give me 2 grains of wheat. And then on the third square, double it again, so there's 4 grains of wheat, and so on. So the king, thinking the inventor of chess was an absolute fool, said, of course, and called for his treasurers to bring a sack of wheat. So the treasurers went away and they came back with a sack of grains of wheat, and they started placing grains on the squares of the chessboard. And at first, the number of grains grows quite slowly, so it goes 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, and the numbers start getting a little bit bigger. But at this point, nobody's really concerned. By the time they get to the end of the second row, they're at 32,000 grains of wheat on one square. People are starting to get a bit more nervous. Actually, these numbers are starting to go up quite a bit. But they keep going, and then the king says to the treasurers, bring more sacks of wheat. So they do, and then by the time we're halfway up the board, there's like millions of grains of grains of wheat on the squares. And then they exhaust all the wheat in the treasury. So the king does the sensible thing that you would do if you were a king in this kind of situation, and he had the inventor of chess executed on the spot for his trickery. And so, this story is really about illustrating the power of exponential growth. That if you kind of, in this case, use doubling to grow a number repeatedly, at first it seems to grow quite slowly, and then after a while it starts to grow exponentially, and the curve suddenly goes up like this. And this is really important context for the field of quantum computing, and why quantum computing is different and why it can give us value that classical computers can't. It's all to do with these kind of exponentials and these rapidly growing numbers. And it's problems that exhibit these characteristics are the ones where quantum computers can have a real advantage. So that's why I'm going to talk about them. Okay, so we're going to look at it in the context of event technology. So as I said earlier, my name's Joe from Lineup Ninja, and I'm interested in this. Well, the reason I'm interested will become apparent. But I'm interested to see how this can help Lineup Ninja with, help us to help event planners with their scheduling issues in particular. So this is the inside of one of IBM's quantum computers. They're currently doing a lot of research into quantum. They're very interesting technologies. Okay, so we live in this very automated world, from vending machines through to your online shopping recommendation. Automation's a fact of a modern life. And I see this very much as an expression of technology use, which is inherent to humans. Since we first learned to harness fire to effectively outsource part of our digestive system. By using fire to break down food, to perform the first part of digestion, it meant we could still access all the same number of calories contained in that food, but we used a lot less energy to access them. So our digestive system became much more efficient. And so we can sort of see automation as being a modern expression of this. By using tools and technology to become much more efficient, we can achieve a lot more. And as we've seen with people like Henry Ford, people who automate successfully can gain massive competitive advantages, whereas those who fail to risk being left behind. Okay. But some problems resist automation. And so some of these problems might be areas that are familiar to you as event planners. So we've got scheduling timetables, for example, seating plans, staff rota planning. Some of these problems exhibit exponential growth as the problem domain gets bigger. And part of the reason for this is when we look at permutations as an example. So let's say you're scheduling some sessions for a conference or an exhibition. And the sessions are A, B, C, and D, and the time slots that you can assign them to are 1, 2, 3, and 4. So when you make your first assignment, you've got 4 choices. You can choose to put session A, B, C, or D in it. Once you've done that, you move on to the second one, and you've then got 3 choices. So you've got B, C, or D, and so on. But what we can see is that these numbers of combinations or numbers of permutations start to grow very rapidly. So from just 4 sessions, there are 24 different ways of arranging them. And it grows massively exponentially. So if there are 5 sessions, there are 120 different ways of organizing them. If there are 10 sessions, there are 3.6 million different ways of arranging those sessions. And if for an event like Event Tech Live, which has got around about 100 sessions, another way of expressing this is as a factorial, by the way, which is what the little exclamation mark means, then there's 92 billion ways of organizing it. You know, this is one of those more than there are atoms in the universe kind of numbers, right? It's just theoretically enormous. Which, you know, well, that's interesting from a theoretical point of view, but what does it mean, like, realistically? Well, if you're going back to our kind of permutations diagram, if you are making these assignments, and let's say you're planning sessions at a conference, you might have constraints like session D can't go in time slot 1. Let's say you've got a keynote speaker and they can't make that time slot, for example. So this then starts to cut down on the number of possible permutations because there's a kind of constraint associated with it. But one of the problems with this is we don't know that we've made. It's not until we get to the point to allocating D to 4 that we realize, oh, this isn't valid anymore. So we've had to go through several assignments. We had to do lots of work to get to the point where we think, oh, right, we've hit this constraint now. We need to now go backtrack and reallocate some of these sessions. But for most events, you're going to have more than one constraint in your schedule, right? There's going to be lots of different constraints. So you might find that actually there's only a few valid combinations, and that in order to find those valid combinations, you've got to go through lots of invalid ones to get there. So you've got to do quite a lot of work. And if you're doing this manually, for example, with like putting post-it notes onto a grid that you've done, or if you're doing it with a spreadsheet, it's a lot of manual mental work for not much benefit because you're spending most of your time looking at invalid timetabling options. And they may also have the concept of soft constraints, which it would be nice if we could have as many as possible of like A being next to B, for example. So soft constraints are ones where it's not the end of the world if they're not met, but it would be good if we can have as many or as few as possible. Is this making sense? Okay, good. I'm glad it's making sense to somebody. So essentially what we're doing here is we've the number of permutations has defined the size of our haystack, and then when we've got these different constraints, that's essentially showing us where those needles are in that haystack. Where are those valid sets of timetables? And the idea of soft constraints is that there are some needles in that haystack which are better than others. So it's not just there are only some needles that you can use, it's like some needles are better than others. So with classical computers, the way they will solve this problem is basically how I just described it. They'll go down through all these various options, so it'll make assignment 1, then it'll make assignment 2, then 3, then it'll get to 4 and go, oh, that's no good, let's backtrack, go to 5, oh, that's no good, let's backtrack. And if you're trying to allocate 100 sessions and you've got this massive number of possible permutations of these sessions, the number of possibilities has grown exponentially, and so the execution time of your algorithm to find that needle in that haystack grows exponentially. So Lineup Ninja, what we've done is we've written an algorithm that will do this for you, and so rather than you spending a few days working out which post-it notes can go in which session slot, it'll take a couple of minutes. And for other applications, like if rather than it being assigning sessions to session slots, it's matchmaking or seating, like something like social tables or network tables products. They're all going to use variations of these algorithms. And the bigger the data sets get, the longer they take to run. So this is a problem for these kind of algorithms. Unfortunately, users' expectations have this kind of, there's like an inflation effect where people get used to a product and, oh, this is great. But if our software is going to take it like 2 minutes to run, to go through all these thousands and millions of combinations, it's not going to be long before users who used to have to do this by hand, they're now sitting looking at a little spinner on the screen going, oh, it's taking forever, it's shit. Well, actually, it's mathematically, numerically, it's performing kind of like minor miracles. And so we're interested in exploring are there better ways of doing this. So an example problem. Rather than just finding a needle in a haystack, we might want to be able to, in the future, say, well, we're going to run a medium-sized exhibition. We've got 100 sessions. We want to have attendee session booking, so people can choose which sessions they want to go to beforehand. There's going to be 5,000 meetings, 5,000 attendees, and they all want to have we want to have some matchmaking for one-to-one meetings. So a problem, which might sound like this is a realistic problem for event planners, right? How do we find the best combination of sessions and meetings that allows the most attendees to attend every session they want to go to, make all of their one-to-one meetings, that maximizes the revenue from our paid-for sessions, and that best matches demand, the demand to attend talks to the venue size that they're going to happen in. So it's kind of like intelligent, dynamic scheduling of all the content for your event. So if you wanted to do that at the moment, your options are basically to use IBM's supercomputer called Summit, and that's just basically going to fail. There's too much complexity in that problem for it to handle it. And so this is why we want to look for things like, can quantum help us? So finally, here we are. We're talking about quantum computers. I've got like 5 minutes left, I think. So quantum computing is an approach to computation that uses quantum phenomena to solve problems that are too hard for classical computers. So, do you need a minute to digest that? Quantum phenomena. So the key quantum phenomena, when you get to the quantum level, things get really weird. Particles can be in multiple states at the same time, which is a phenomenon called superposition. Particles can become entangled, whereby you perform an operation on one particle and a predictable outcome will happen on another particle elsewhere in space. Quantum computers use these phenomena to store data in a fundamentally different way and to connect data up so that quantum computers can understand large data sets. And they can understand exponentially large data sets, and they can process them in parallel. So if you imagine going back to our kind of tree of possibilities, with a classical computer, you have to go down each branch of the tree, one after the other, and evaluate it. A quantum computer will effectively be able to traverse that whole all the branches of that tree simultaneously, if you've got enough qubits, which are this basic unit of data storage in a quantum computer. Haven't got time to explain this slide, but basically, if you're interested, and I can see you all are, if you go to IBM Q Experience, you can. They've got a simulator where you can play with your own quantum computer. So, what are the potential applications of this? Any kind of problem in event management where you have these exponentially large data sets. So it could be scheduling, it could be one-to-one meetings, it could be seating plans, it could potentially be if you're having to crunch big data, for example, if you're doing crowd shaping, where you've got millions of data points from RFID badges going past iBeacons on the floor, and you want to manage traffic flows. Also, things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so some of them more kind of like getting real meaning from your data. A couple of quick heads-ups, implications for data security. If quantum computers are able to solve these mathematically impossible things, well, isn't most of our encryption based on the fact that it takes classical computers years to solve some problems? Yes, some of them. So quantum will render some modes of data security obsolete. In the slides at the end, I've got links to further reading. So there's this Gartner report which tells you which forms of data encryption are likely to be vulnerable to quantum hacking. Also, quantum teleportation, because we've got entangled particles. If we know the value of one and we tell it to be entangled with another one, we know that the value of that second one. If we change this one, this particle at the same time can change its value without there being any other connection, and so that allows us to teleport data across space. It sounds like sci-fi stuff. It sounds really like, really? But there has been some successful experiments done already. People have been able to teleport data from China to Austria, and there are more references at the end of the slides. Who are the key players? That lot. So on the left-hand side, people you will have heard of. On the right-hand side, these are all kind of startups in quantum. Quantum supremacy is in the news at the moment. It's basically a bit of a technical discussion about whether quantum computers are genuinely able to do things that classical computers can't do in any meaningful time. There is existing research that has already been done into the kinds of algorithms that we would need to be able to do this kind of timetabling I've been talking about earlier on. So the job for us will be, how can we learn from that research, operationalize it into products that we can then bring to the event tech market so we can help event planners work more efficiently. So when can I get my hands on a quantum computer? This is Gartner's hype cycle. So new technologies, new emerging technologies coming up the left-hand side. We get more and more excited about them until we reach what's called thank you. We reach the peak of inflated expectations, which is about where I am at the moment. And then after that, everyone gets disillusioned with it, 'cause like, oh, we thought this was going to be brilliant, but actually it turns out it's not anywhere near as good as everyone promised. And then ultimately, at the far side, we get the plateau of productivity, so when these products are actually useful. And so we're looking for quantum, we're looking at 5 to 10 years out before this is actually going to be making a difference in a marketplace. So this is definitely one of those long-term things. So that's why. So what should you do next? Why am I even talking about this? What's the point of this whole thing? So basically, Gartner reckon that by 2023, 20% of organizations will have some kind of quantum research program. So it's kind of it's getting on the near horizon. They're really complicated. Quantum computers, if you want to truly understand them, they're really complicated. So for now, I would recommend start learning about them, get it on your radar, start exploring it, finding out what's it all about, how does it work, and what are the potential implications for my business. But don't expect to be using one in the next couple of years. Okay, Q&A. So I'm sure I've run terribly over time there. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, so we've got some questions in Slido. So unfortunately, we only probably have time for one, so let's take the top voted one. And it's about blockchain security. Do you think quantum computing has the potential to make it obsolete?
In terms of, yes, potentially. Well, potentially. It's an interesting question about, so blockchain, yes, potentially. Although there's a whole online community of people who are looking at this, like how do we make sure that blockchain and cryptocurrencies remain secure with the rise of quantum computing. And at the moment, they seem fairly confident that they can. It's essentially an arms race, right? It's a technical arms race, and yeah, they're fairly confident that they can stay ahead of the quantum computing revolution for blockchain. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for now. But please feel free to reach out to Joe, and I'm sure he'll be able to answer your questions after the session. So thank you all very much for attending.
Thank you.